Dawn came slowly to Dustwater Bend, the way it always did, crawling across the dirt like an old dog too tired to rise. The desert hadn't seen rain in months, and every inch of ground carried the brittle crackle of a world on edge. Some places felt cursed by the sun itself. Dustwater was one of them, and riding straight into that heat was a man who had once survived worse. Malcolm Rourke. Mal, to the few who dared speak his name, guided his horse along the abandoned wagon trail without saying a word. He was a black Union scout in another lifetime, a soldier in a war that had promised change but delivered only graves. Now he wandered the frontier like a ghost that refused to stop walking. His shoulders carried the weight of a country that had never truly made room for him, and his silence said more than any sermon ever could. He didn't look for trouble, but trouble. Trouble had a way of sniffing out men like him. The morning light stretched long across the plain, turning the dust into gold and the horizon into a shimmering knife edge. Mal tilted his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the glare. His horse snorted, unsettled. Something on the wind carried a wrongness he felt in his bones. Mal slowed the horse with a gentle pull. There it was, a scent faint at first, then sharper. Smoke. Old smoke. Not wildfire, not out here. Something smaller, more deliberate. A campfire, maybe, or something far uglier. Mal listened. No birdsong. No rustle of jackrabbit or feet. The world felt paused, as if the land itself were holding its breath. He'd learned long ago that silence was the loudest warning a man could get. He nudged the horse forward. A few minutes later, the trail curved toward the riverbank. That's where he saw her. At first, she was only a shape, a silhouette slumped against a post, sun-bleached and still. The closer he rode, the more the truth carved itself into his vision. A woman was tied upright to the wooden post, wrists bound behind her back, ankles lashed tight. Her skin was burned along one side, her cheeks swollen, her breath a thin rattle barely strong enough to stir the dust. Someone had tried to kill her slowly. Someone had made a point. Pinned to her chest was a sign, blackened at the edges as if held over flame. This town does not forgive. Mal dismounted in silence. He didn't shout, didn't call out, just walked slowly, boots crunching over broken reeds and sun-hardened earth. He'd seen this kind of cruelty before. Too much of it. Enough that part of him had learned to keep his face stone still, even when his gut twisted from the sight. The woman's eyelashes trembled. Pain dragged her halfway back into the world. She looked at Mal with one eye swollen shut, and the other barely open. Her lips cracked as she tried to speak, but all that came out was a raw gasp. Mal freed her hands first. The ropes had been pulled so tight, they'd carved bruises into her skin. She crumpled forward as he cut the last knot, but he caught her before she hit the ground. Her body weighed nothing. She was a bundle of bones wrapped in stubborn breath. He eased her down, letting her rest against his knee. "Easy," he murmured, a voice carved from gravel and long miles. "You're safe now." Safe. It was a word the West rarely made good on. The woman swallowed hard, fighting for strength. They left me for dead," she whispered. Her voice scraped like broken glass. "Wanted someone to find me. Someone they're hunting." She gripped the edge of Mal's coat with trembling fingers. "Are you one of the rebels?" she asked, desperate to understand why a stranger would risk stopping here at all. Mal shook his head. "I'm nobody's rebel." She inhaled a ragged breath, the burn on her cheek catching the light like a brand. "They think you are." A cold line slid through Mal's spine. She continued, each word pulled from the depths of her pain. "Sheriff Creed's men. They tortured me, wanted the outcasts hiding in the canyons, thought I was helping them." She swallowed again. "But I wasn't. I was just the one they could reach." Her eyes searched Mal's face, fearful, hopeful, uncertain. "They said a lone rider would come through today," she whispered. "Said they'd mistaken him for a rebel scout. Said they'd draw him in with a body the town wouldn't bother to bury." She tried to laugh, but it broke into a sob. Guess they were right. Mal didn't answer. Didn't need to. The truth hung in the dust between them. A hunter had become the hunted, and whoever Sheriff Creed wanted so badly, Creed now believed he'd just walked straight into his trap. The woman clutched his sleeve again. Please, don't leave me here. They'll come back. Mal looked up at the empty horizon, at the trail, at the quiet that felt too perfect, then back at her. What's your name? He asked. Clara, she whispered. Clara Holt. Mal nodded, once slow, resigned, and certain. Well, Clara, he said, lifting her gently into his arms. It seems your sheriff and I just became acquainted. He stepped away from the post, carrying her toward his horse. And I don't take kindly to introductions like this. The sun climbed higher, the wind shifted, and somewhere far beyond the river, riders began to gather. Mal rode slow along the riverbank, Clara's weakened body leaning against his chest, her breaths shallow but steady. The horse's hooves clopped softly over the dusty trail, but Clara flinched at every sound as if the world itself had turned against her. Mal could feel her trembling even through his coat. She wasn't just scarred, she was shattered, and she wasn't done talking. When she finally gathered enough strength to lift her head, her voice came out thin, scraped down to the bone. You don't know what kind of place you're walking into? She whispered. Mal didn't answer. He'd learned long ago that people in pain needed to speak, and interrupting them was a kind of cruelty. Clara swallowed hard. Sheriff Creed, August Creed, he runs Dustwater the way a hangman runs a gallows. No law but his, no mercy but what he lets fall by accident. Mal felt her grip tighten around the fabric of his coat. He was a Confederate captain once. Lost the war but kept the uniform. Claims he's restoring order out here. But really he's just filling the graveyard. Her words cracked like dry earth. If someone crosses him, they vanish. If someone questions him, they vanish. If someone simply stands too tall in front of him. She paused, breath catching. They vanish. Mal kept writing, but his jaw tightened. Clara went on, voice softening to something heartbreakingly small. My husband, Thomas. He worked at the freight office, kept records of land claims, supplies, cattle shipments. He found something, numbers that didn't add up, deeds that were forged, money going out that didn't match what was supposed to come in. He told me he'd uncovered proof that Creed was stealing from settlers, buying loyalty with bribes, turning Dustwater into his own empire. She paused, and Mal felt her body tense with the memory. He said he needed to warn someone, said he couldn't stay quiet. Her voice wavered. He didn't make it to sunrise. They dragged him out of our home before I could even reach the door. Mal closed his eyes briefly. He had seen too many nights like that, in too many towns. Clara wasn't finished. My brothers went looking for him, wanted to know the truth. Creed sent word that they were being questioned. The next day, I was told they'd tried to escape custody. She laughed, a broken, bitter sound. It's skippy. They never even made it to the jail. I found their boots outside the tannery 5 days later. Mal's grip tightened around the reins. He didn't need to ask what she meant by that. Boots outside a tannery was Dustwater's quiet way of saying no bodies to bury. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, voice growing hoarse. I tried to keep Tomas's papers safe. Creed's men searched the house, beat me when they didn't find what they wanted, accused me of being in league with the rebels hiding outside town. Told me I'd been passing information helping people run. She shuddered. When they realized they couldn't break me, they decided to make an example instead. They dragged me to the river, tied me to that post, burned me just enough so I wouldn't pass out too fast. Her breath quivered, said if anyone tried to cut me down, they'd find the rebels they were after. Mal finally spoke, his voice low and rough. What rebels? No one knows. Clara whispered. Maybe they exist. Maybe they don't. Creed only needs the rumor. Fear does the rest. Mal said nothing for a long moment. The horse carried them deeper into the scrublands, the river winding beside them like a silent witness. "You got someone else left?" Mal finally asked. "No," Clara breathed. "Just me." Silence settled around them again. Heavy, bitter, final. Mal had heard enough stories like this to fill a whole continent. Every one of them left a scar. Every one of them pulled at him in ways he wished they didn't. He didn't want to feel responsible for this woman. He didn't want to care that much. But her next words sliced through him like a rusted blade. "If you leave me here," she whispered, "you're no better than the men who tied me to that post." Mal stiffened. He nearly reined the horse to a stop. The truth in her voice hit harder than any accusation. He took a slow breath. "I didn't put you there." "That's not the point," Clara said, her voice firmer despite its tremor. "Neither did Tomas. Neither did my brothers. But men like Creed count on people walking away. Count on folks thinking it isn't their fight. That's how he wins." Mal's throat tightened. He hated how much the words dug under his skin. "I've spent years trying not to get pulled into other people's hell," he muttered. Clara didn't flinch. "And how's that working for you?" It was a fair question. Too fair. Mal felt the weight of every grave he'd ridden past, every cry he'd ignored, every injustice he'd convinced himself wasn't his problem. He'd buried enough guilt for 2 lifetimes. Clara's voice softened, almost pleading. "You ride away from Dustwater now, and you're helping them finish what they started." Mal's horse climbed a rise, revealing the distant valley, where Dustwater Bend lay hidden in the haze. A quiet town, a pretty town, if you didn't know the bones it was built on. Mal stared at it, with the tired eyes of a man who'd seen too much and saved too little. He could walk away. He had walked away before. But something in Clara's trembling voice and something in the charred sign they left pinned to her suffering would not let him this time. He exhaled slowly. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He simply kept riding toward Dustwater Bend, because his soul had already made the choice for him. The riverbank lay behind them, but Dustwater Bend was a place where trouble traveled faster than a man on horseback. And Mal knew they hadn't put near enough distance between Clara and the men who wanted her dead. He heard them before he saw them, distant hooves pounding against hard earth, sharp and purposeful. Not wandering riders, not travelers, hunters. Clara felt it too. Her shoulders tensed against him, breath catching in her throat, like she feared even the air would betray them. Mal slid off the horse and pulled Clara down with him, careful but swift. "Quiet," he whispered, though she was already trembling in silence. The riders arrived in a storm of dust and leather. Mal dragged her into a low thicket of brush, deep, thorny, the kind that tore at skin but hid bodies well. Clara's breathing hitched, the pain of her burns throbbing under every shallow gasp. Mal pressed a hand gently over her mouth, not to silence her, but to steady her. Her eyes met his, wide and fever-bright. She nodded, trusting him even when trust felt like a dangerous thing. Sheriff Creed's militia fanned out along the riverbank, 6 men at first, then 8, horses snorting, rifles strapped to their saddles. Their coats were gray-dusted black, with iron badges glinting in the sunlight. These weren't lawmen. These were claimants of fear. Leading them was Deputy Jackson Voss, a tall, ash-blond brute, with a jaw like cut stone and eyes the color of burnt steel. He said Creed's orders in the same voice a butcher used to choose which animal died next. Voss dismounted and crouched beside the post where Clara had been tied. He ran 2 fingers along the charred wood, then lifted them to his nose, sniffing like a hound tracking the last of a scent. He was here, he said. No uncertainty, no hesitation, just a cold certainty. Another rider leaned from his saddle. "You think the girl's still alive?" Voss rose slowly. If she wasn't, the vultures would be feeding already. His gaze swept the brush, slicing through the landscape inch by inch. Mal held Clara closer. She trembled under his palm, trying not to breathe too loud, trying not to exist. "And she's alive," Voss growled. Because he cut her loose. A murmur rippled through the men. Someone spat in the dirt. Someone else muttered that Creed wasn't going to like this news. Creed. Always Creed. A man whose name was spoken the way some folks whispered devil in a church pew. Voss swung back onto his horse. Search east and south. He can't be far east. The riders turned in formation and thundered away, dust trailing behind them like smoke behind a fire. Mal didn't move until the last hoofbeat faded. Even then, he waited. He'd been hunted before. He knew how predators liked to double back. Only when the silence settled heavy around them did he ease his hand from Clara's mouth. She let out a breath that was half sob, half relief. "They'll never stop," she whispered. "I know," Mal said. His voice had no comfort in it, but it had truth, and sometimes truth was all a person needed, not to fall apart. He helped her back onto the horse and led them away from the river, from the post, from the men closing in. But the desert was not kind today. The land grew harsher the further they rode. Rock spires stabbed toward the skies, jagged and sharp. Canyons cut deep wounds into the earth, as if the land itself remembered every cruelty committed on it. The wind carried dust heavy enough to sting skin. Up, dark clouds gathered, the color of old bruises. Clara swayed in the saddle, her fever burning hotter. Mal heard her teeth click as she tried to stay upright. She whispered apologies every few minutes, guilt lingering in her voice like she was slowing him down when the truth was, he wasn't leaving her no matter what she said. "You need to rest," he muttered. "No," she rasped. "If we stop, they'll catch us. We'll find a place high enough to watch the trails." She nodded, but her strength was already slipping. When the first crack of thunder shook the canyon walls, Clara jolted as if struck. The horse danced beneath them. Nervous under the swelling storm, Mal led them deeper into the badlands, weaving through the twisting gullies. Every shadow felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Every cliff edge felt like a rifleman's perch. The storm followed them like a curse. Rain splattered against the stone. At first only a few drops, then a sudden curtain of water that soaked the dust and released the trapped smell of scorched earth. Lightning ripped across the sky, bright enough to carve the canyon in white for a heartbeat. Clara's voice grew faint. I'm sorry." "Mal, don't waste breath on sorry," he said. "Save it for staying alive." But she was already slipping. Her head sagged to the side, her fingers letting go of the saddle horn. Mal caught her just before she fell. Her body felt too hot in some places and too cold in others, a fever fighting a war inside her. She wasn't strong enough to win. "Clara." He shook her gently. She didn't answer. The thunder rolled again, swallowing the sound of her weakening breaths. Mal hoisted her over his shoulders, carrying her like she weighed no more than a sack of grain. But there was no grain in the world that trembled this way. No canvas sack that whispered, "Don't leave me," with a voice fading into rain. He walked. He kept walking. Lightning cracked across the skiway, the white glare revealing empty desert, stretching miles in every direction, the kind of place where even hope ran dry. But Mal didn't stop. He didn't know if he could save Clara. He didn't know if they could outrun Creed's men. He didn't even know if Dawn would find them alive. He only knew one thing when he found Clara tied to that post. A line had been crossed inside him that he couldn't uncross. So he carried her into the heart of the storm. Every step defying the men hunting them, the desert trying to break them, and the past that refused to let him rest. The hunt had begun, but so had the fight. Mal didn't know how long he carried Clara through the storm. Minutes, hours, maybe something longer. Time stretched strange in the badlands, bending under fear and exhaustion. The rain came down in sheets, turning the gullies into rivers of mud. Mal pushed through it all until his boots slipped on loose gravel, and his breath rasped hot in his throat. But just when his strength began to fray, he saw a thin thread of lantern light, flickering from the mouth of an old silver mine, carved into the hillside like a scar. It was no town, no settlement, just a place the world had forgotten, a place for the forgotten to gather. Voices murmured inside, soft wants, wordy wants, not the sharp barking of Creed's militia. Mal stepped into the shelter of the mine, Clara limp in his arms, The storm's roar dulled behind them, swallowed by the cool, echoing dark. A man stepped forward to meet him. He had one arm and a preacher's collar torn half loose, but there was something steady in his eyes. Not gentle steady, the kind of steadiness built from surviving storms no sermon could calm. "You look half dead," the man said, "and she looks worse. She needs help." Mal replied, "Then you came to the right place, or the wrong one, depending on how you feel about outlaws." The man said with a faint, grim smile, "Name's Bishop Crane. Used to preach the gospel. These days I preach survival." Mal didn't answer. He was too tired for judgments. Crane led them deeper into the mind, and Mal saw what this place truly was. Families huddled under blankets made from old gunny sacks. Indigenous elders, with faces lined by grief, murmured quietly around a small fire. Laborers with bruised ribs and split lips lay on bedrolls beside railroad workers who'd fled when their overseers tried to chain them to debts they could never pay. Children stared from the shadows, their eyes too old for their years. This wasn't an outlaw camp. It was a refuge carved from American cruelty. Crane motioned to a makeshift cot. "Lay her down. I'll fetch what medicine we've scraped together." Mal lowered Clara gently. Her lashes fluttered with fever. Crane's people brought blankets, water, herbs, whatever they could spare. Hours passed in broken fragments. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her burns cleaned and salved, her fever cooled with damp cloths. Mal stayed beside her, refusing to eat, refusing to leave. Even the children who passed by kept their distance. Something in his worn face told them he wasn't ready for company. Finally, Clara stirred, her eyes open, bleary but alive. "Where are we?" she whispered. "A place Creed pretends doesn't exist," Mal said. "And a preacher who pretends he's not a leader." Clara managed a faint smile. "He's safer than most leaders." Crane heard and chuckled. If only that were true. When Clara was strong enough to sit up, Mal asked the question that had been gnawing at him since the river. "What did you mean earlier? About being accused of helping rebels? About running? You left something out." Clara stared into the dim glow of the lantern flame. Shadows climbed the walls like ghosts. She'd been holding something inside, a truth she wasn't sure he was ready for. "I wasn't just some woman Creed beat for sport," she said slowly. "I worked for him, in his office. I kept his books." Mal's brows drew tight. "You were his bookkeeper?" "Yes." "Then you know more than you're telling." Clara let out a breath that trembled like a held-back storm. "I know where he hides militia ammunition. I know which ranchers he pays to spy on their neighbors. I know which settlers pretend to support him, but whisper against him after dark. I know how many prisoners he starves in that jail, and how many bodies pass through the courthouse cellar." The mind fell quiet. Even the fires seemed to still. "And I know every secret path in and out of Dustwater," she said. "I spent 2 years learning them, 2 years keeping my head down, 2 years pretending I didn't hear screams through the floorboards." Mal watched her closely. "You didn't escape by chance." "No," she said. "I escaped because I planned to burn Creed's empire down to the foundation. I escaped because Tomas, my husband, died trying." The name hit harder this time. Clara's voice softened, filled with a grief that had stopped being tears long ago. "He found proof that Creed forged land deeds, took land from indigenous families, claimed homesteads left behind by men who'd gone to work rail lines for a season, promising them jobs, and returning their homes to the sheriff's ledger instead." She swallowed. "Tomas wanted to expose him, and Creed killed him for it," Mal said quietly. Crane stood nearby, head bowed. "He's done worse to others who tried less." Mal rubbed his hands together, as if trying to warm blood that had gone cold. "You really want to destroy him?" Clara nodded. "Not for revenge, for truth." Mal shook his head, eyes hollowing. "Truth doesn't survive war. This isn't war," Clara whispered. "Not yet. Right now it's just suffering. Suffering he controls." She leaned closer. "I don't have the strength to finish what Tomas started alone. I barely had the strength to crawl out of that pot." Her voice cracked. But if Creed isn't stopped, Dustwater will drown under him. Every family here, every soul hiding in these tunnels, they'll live and die under that man's boot. Mal's jaw tightened. I've fought wars already. Buried enough good people to fill 10 graveyards. I'm not leading another one. Clara looked at him, then not in anger, not in desperation, but with a clarity that pierced deeper than any wound. Justice ain't the same as revenge, Mal said softly. In a place like this, Clara replied. It has to be. Her words hung in the mind like the echo of a distant church bell, solemn, truthful, damning. Mal felt something shift inside him. Not acceptance, not agreement, but a crack, a hairline fracture in the wall he'd built between himself and every battle he refused to fight. Clara wasn't asking him to wage a war. She was asking him not to walk away from one that had already begun. And Mal, weary as he was, could feel the truth settling heavy in his bones and Dustwater Bend. The line between justice and revenge wasn't just blurred. It was the only road left to walk. Days inside the abandoned silver mine took on a rhythm, rough but real. The storm moved on, leaving behind clear skies and a broken calm. But inside the rock, something new was starting to grow, something more dangerous than Creed's bullets, more stubborn than his fear. Bishop Crane watched it happen before Mal did. You know they're looking at you like a captain, Crane said one evening, leaning his good shoulder against the cave wall, as Mal checked the chambers of an old revolver. I'm not their captain, Mal muttered. Maybe not yet, Crane answered. But you're the first man in a long time who knows how to stand between them and a gun barrel without shaking. Mal didn't respond. He didn't like the sound of the word captain. It tasted too much like the past. But the people came anyway. They came to him with questions about patrol routes, about the township roads, about how Creed's men moved. They asked how far a bullet would fly true, how to cross open ground without dying, how to hide in plain sight. And because Mal wasn't the sort of man to leave people ignorant in a place this lethal, he answered. Then teaching became training. He started with tracking. In the scrubland beyond the mine, Mal showed them how to read the ground like a ledger, a broken stem, a crushed patch of grass, a heel print, turned just a little too sharp in the dirt. Don't just see prints, he told them. See choices, see where a man decided to hurry, or where he stopped to listen. The land remembers decisions when bullets have already forgotten them. They listened. Railroad workers, farmhands, mothers with tired eyes, teenagers who had seen too much. They followed the lines he traced in the dust. They watched his hands. They tried, failed, tried again. Next came ambush strategy. He stood them in a rough circle and drew maps with a bent nail in the cave floor. You don't meet power head on, he said. That's how power likes it. You pick at its edges. You make it nervous. You make it bleed in places it thought were safe. He taught them how to choose high ground and blind spots, how to let a rider move into a pocket of vulnerability before anyone raised a weapon, how to break off and vanish before the second wave arrived. Survival first, Mal said. Glory gets you carved into a headstone, then distraction tactics. Clara helped with that. She knew Creed's habits. She knew what rattled his men. You don't always have to fight them, she said, her voice still scarred but stronger by the day. Sometimes all you have to do is make them look the wrong way at the right moment. So they learned how to spook horses without being seen, how to send up dust in the distance to mimic movement, how to use lantern light and broken glass to create phantom signals that drew guards away from where the real threat was creeping in. Desert survival came next. Mal walked them through water sources, how to find seep springs hidden in rock, how to collect dew with cloth at dawn, how to cool a fever with shade and patience instead of panic. He showed them how to travel at night, when the heat became a weapon, how to read stars as guides when the trails vanished. Silent signaling was added piece by piece, hand signs for danger, safety. retreat, and regroup. No shouting, no names, just shared understanding. Noise is a confession, Mal told them. Make the world guess where you are. He taught them how to shoot last. The weapons they had were mismatched and worn old rifles, chipped revolvers, shotguns that had seen better decades. Mal lined them up anyway. Listen close, he said. A gun is a promise you can't take back. You don't fire to feel strong. You fire when nothing else will keep you breathing. Understand? They did. Or at least they wanted to. He taught them how to breathe before pulling a trigger, how to aim for legs instead of chests when a warning might still save a life, how to count shots, how to reload without panicking, how to hide the muzzle flash behind cover. By the end of the week, that ragged collection of nobodies, the drifting, the discarded, the wounded, moved through the desert with a kind of quiet coordination that made even Bishop Crane raise an eyebrow. Look at them, Crane said one night, watching a group return from a scouting run, signaling their success with a series of hand signs Mal had taught. Used to be they flinched at every sound. Now the desert flinches when it hears them coming. Mal simply grunted, but deep inside, something like reluctant pride stirred. Still, it wasn't training alone that set the camp on fire. It was Clara. She stood among them each night, when the work was done, when their muscles ached and doubt crept in like cold. Her voice was rough, never fully healed from smoke and rope, but it carried better than any shouted sermon. You think Creed is the only man who knows how to run a town, she told them. He ain't. You've run fields, run rail lines, run cattle across rivers and back. The only difference is, he has paper that says it's his land and guns that say you can't argue. She held up her burned hands. He did this because he knows if we ever stand up together, he loses everything. Tyrants don't fear weapons. They fear witnesses who stop being afraid. A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Torches flickered in their eyes like new stars. For the first time, Bishop Crane murmured to Mal, they think they might live long enough to see something better. Mal watched Clara, the way she lifted their chins, the way she turned their pain into anger, and their anger into focus. He couldn't deny it. The camp believed in her in a way they didn't quite know how to believe in themselves. But belief drew attention, and someone was listening who shouldn't have been. His name was Elias. He was barely 12, narrow-shouldered and quick-eyed, the kind of boy who'd learned to survive by making himself invisible. He'd come to the mine with an aunt weeks earlier, after a ranch fire no one believed was an accident. He trained with the others, silent and eager, never complaining. But fear has long fingers, especially when it wraps around a child's throat. Late one night, when Clara spoke about a future without Creed, and the camp responded with low, determined cheers, Elias slipped away. No one noticed. Not at first. Not when they were talking of future harvests and free days, of sleeping without one ear open for the sheriff's boots. Out beyond the mouth of the mine, under a ski crowded with stars, Elias followed a narrow goat path, leading down into the canyon. His breath came fast, not from exertion, but from the weight of the choice he'd made. He was headed toward the outer trail, toward the men who had promised him something he'd never had before: protection. They came with the darkness on their side. The first sound was a distant crack that didn't belong to the settling rock or cooling earth. A gunshot, muffled but unmistakable. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Mal woke with that sound already filed in the part of his mind that never truly slept. He reached for his revolver, just as another shot rang out. Closer this time, followed by a scream, cut short. Then the mine exploded with noise, gunfire, shouted orders, boots pounding against stone. The furious howl of men who believed they were owed control over other people's lives. Creed's militia spilled into the camp like a flood of iron and smoke. Elias had earned his promised coin. Chaos tore the sanctuary to pieces. People scrambled for cover, grabbing for children, for loved ones, for any weapon within reach. Dust filled the air, lit by muzzle flashes and lantern light. Mal fired back, pulling 3 of Creed's men down, before a bullet carved through his side. Hot and searing, driving the breath from his lungs, he staggered, hand pressed to his ribs. The metallic taste of blood rose in his throat. He could hear Clara shouting somewhere in the fray, calling out names, trying to hold the line, trying to keep people from breaking into blind panic. While she cried, but the crowd swallowed her voice. He saw her for one brief second, standing near a support beam, hair falling loose, a rifle clutched in her hands, and fury blazing in her eyes. She looked like everything Creed feared most, a woman he'd failed to kill, now leading the very people he tried to erase. Then the militia swarmed her. 3 men slammed into her at once. She fired once. One of them fell. Another struck her across the back with a rifle butt. She went down hard. Breath knocked from her body. Ropes were already in the hands of the men who grabbed her. They didn't plan to lose her twice. Clara Mal roared, forcing his legs to move. He cut down 2 more riders, even as his vision blurred at the edges, even as the pain in his ribs screamed with every breath. One of Creed's men tackled him from the side. They struggled near the edge of the mine's outer ledge, boots scraping on loose rock. A second blow caught Mal across the skull. The world tilted. Then the ground vanished beneath his feet. He felt himself falling down a short, savage drop, and slammed hard against a lower ledge of the ravine. Pain detonated through his body. He rolled, stones tearing at his palms, until he came to rest in the shallow shadow below. Above him, the world burned. He heard more shots, more shouts, the smell of fire mixed with cold rock and his own blood. Through the ringing in his ears, he caught pieces of words: secure the girl, burn the rest. Creed wants a message. Clara screamed his name once, just once. Then her voice was muffled, dragged away, swallowed by the chaos and the distance. The silver mine, their refuge, their fragile hope, went up in flames. Smoke poured out of the old shaft, like the ghosts of every worker who'd ever died inside it. Mal tried to stand. His legs didn't listen. Blood seeped between his fingers, where they pressed against his ribs. His breath came as short, ragged gasps. He tasted earth, smoke, and failure. By the time the gunfire faded, the camp was gone. Bodies lay motionless where they'd fallen. Survivors, if there were any, had scattered into the desert like frightened birds. Mal didn't know how long he lay there. Long enough for the fire to dim. Long enough for the smoke to drift. Long enough for the desert chill to creep into his veins. When he finally managed to crawl higher, to peer over the shattered lip of rock, he saw nothing left of their sanctuary but blackened timbers and ash. And Clara was nowhere. Creed had taken his message with him. News travels faster than fire in a frightened town. And by dawn the next day, Dustwater Bend knew every detail that Creed wanted them to know. The word was on every lip, whispered over wash basins, murmured in doorways, traded in the creak of saloon chairs and the hush of church steps. Clara Holt, the sheriff's traitorous former bookkeeper, the woman who dared to stand against him, was to hang at sunrise in the town square. Not in secret, not on some hidden riverbank, in front of everyone. Rebellion, Creed's men announced, will be choked at the root. They said it with satisfaction, with certainty. They didn't know that somewhere out beyond town, in the bruised light of early morning, a wounded man was pulling himself to his feet, ribs aching, spirit burning. They didn't know Malcolm Rourke was still alive. Dawn broke over Dustwater Bend like a wound reopening. The sky was the color of old bruises, purple fading into sickly yellow, while the town below sat tense and silent, as if it, too, sensed what was coming. On the outskirts, where the desert met the ragged fences of abandoned homesteads, a figure rode out of the rising light. Mal Rourke, bleeding, limping, barely upright in the saddle, his ribs bandaged with torn cloth, his shoulders stiff with dried blood, his breath shallow. but steady. The horse beneath him carried the weight of a man who, by all rights, should have died in that ravine. But death had tried and failed. Some men were just too stubborn to stay down. Behind him rode the few who had survived the massacre in the mine. Bishop Crane, one arm wrapped in cloth, the other gripping the reins with grim determination. Talon and Ridge, the Apache brothers, their faces marked with ash and resolve. 5 freed railroad workers who had carried friends out of the flames only to find there was no camp left to return to. A handful of settlers who had lost kin to Creed's greed and refused to let another sunrise pass under his shadow. They rode without banner or fanfare, a silent army of the forgotten. Mal said nothing as the wooden sign at the edge of town creaked in the wind. He didn't need to. Everyone behind him already knew why they were here. Dustwater Bend had one more reckoning coming. As they approached the town square, voices rose like a dying hymn. Mal slowed his horse, eyes narrowing at the sight ahead. The hanging tree, the same tree where workers had vanished, where dissent had been silenced, where fear had been fed year after year, until the roots drank more blood than water. And now Clara stood on a crate beneath its branches, rope cinched tight around her bruised neck, hands bound behind her. The fever had passed, but her strength hadn't returned. She swayed slightly, jaw clenched, eyes fixed straight ahead, not on the crowd, not on her captors, but on something only she could see. Sheriff August Creed stood beside Oyster. His polished boots gleamed even in the dusty dawn, and his voice carried with the smugness of a man who believed himself invincible. "People of Dustwater Bend," he announced, "let this morning be a lesson. Let it remind you that this town stands on order, not chaos, discipline, not rebellion." He paced in front of Clara like a wolf circling prey. "This woman sought to tear apart what we built. She spread lies, sheltered traitors, and sowed violence. And so justice must be done." His speech slithered across the square. Some townsfolk bowed their heads. Some stared. Some looked away. Everyone had their own ghosts tied to that tree. Creed lifted his hand toward the sun, as if claiming it too. "Let Dustwater see that no one, not a thief, not a deserter, not a woman pretending to be stronger than she is, escapes the law of this land." Clara didn't look afraid. She looked furious. Mal felt something hot coil inside him. Fury, grief, purpose. All those things blended into something sharp enough to cut. He raised his rifle. For one breath, Dustwater Bend stood silent. Then Mal squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the square like lightning splitting a dead tree. The bullet sheared through the rope just above Clara's neck, sending it whipping loose. The crowd gasped. Clara dropped to her knees, choking on sudden air. Creed spun, shouting orders, but it was too late. War erupted. Talon and Richis were the first to strike, their shouts echoing across the square as they swept along the flanks. Bishop Crane charged down the center, like a man chasing salvation. The railroad workers fired with measured precision, less bullets, more purpose. Settlers rose from behind barrels and doorways, guns pulled from hiding places buried for years. Dustwater Bend, long suffocated by fear, tore open. The militia splintered in a heartbeat. Some fled, some fired blindly, some froze, realizing the tide had turned in ways they never imagined. Fire sparked from a lantern knocked into a hay cart. Bummies leaped hungrily across the front of the general store, licking at the boards like they'd been waiting for this very moment. Smoke curled up the main street, mingling with dust and gunpowder and shouts of defiance. Clara, still coughing, grabbed a fallen rifle and forced herself to her feet. Pain shook her legs, but determination held them firm. She fired at the men closing in on Mal, clearing his path as he strode through the chaos, like a masked walking toward judgment he had long postponed. Every step brought him closer to the courthouse, closer to Creed. The sheriff retreated into the building, slamming the doors behind him. Mal followed, pushing through smoke-fogged hallways lit only by flames spewing through the rafters. Papers burned, furniture toppled. The courthouse, the heart of Creed's tyranny, was collapsing from inside. In the main chamber, Creed stood waiting, pistol drawn, Fury etched across his face. "This town was built on my law," he roared. Mal stared at him. He scolded. "Then it's time the law burned." Creed lunged with a knife, teeth bared. Rage well defied. Bottle sidestepped, grabbing the sheriff's wrist and twisting hard until the blade clattered to the floor. Creed swung again with the pistol, catching Mal across the jaw. Pussy. Blood filled Mal's mouth, metallic, and war vivos, but Mal didn't fall. He tackled Creed against a burning beam. Sparks rained around them as they struggled, two men, two visions of Dustwater Bend, locked in a desperate, brutal fight, with no room for mercy. Creed clawed at Mal's injured side, reopening the wound. Mal grunted in pain, then drove his fist into Creed's throat, sending him staggering. That's when Clara appeared in the doorway. Soot on her face, a rifle in her hands, eyes that had seen too much and refused to look away again. Creed froze when he saw her. "You don't get to die a hero," Clara said quietly. "You die forgotten." Creed backed away, tripping over burning debris. His boots slipped on collapsing floorboards. The flames behind him surged, swallowing the wall, the ceiling, the past he'd built on the bones of innocent people. Mal stepped back, Clara stepped back, and Sheriff August Creed disappeared into the fire he'd started. Long before this day, the fire finally claiming him at last. Morning crawled slowly over Dustwater Bend, as if the sun weren't quite sure it should rise on a place that had seen so much darkness just hours before. Smoke drifted through the air in thin gray ribbons, softening the edges of burned porches and mustard windows. But there was something different in that smoke, something lighter than the ash and soot. Freedom. The fires had died. The militia was gone. And Dustwater Bend was standing again. Townspeople emerged from their homes like survivors stepping out of a long storm. Some held blankets around their shoulders. Some carried buckets of water. Some simply held hands with family they thought they might never see again. None of them spoke at first, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. For the first time in years, the square belonged to them. Bishop Crane climbed onto the cracked stone step of the ruined courthouse, his collar still torn, his face streaked with soot, but his voice clear and steady. "This town will not trade one tyrant for another," he said. "We build something new, a place where every soul has a say. All races, both races, all families, all workers." A murmur spread through the crowd. Relief, hope, uncertainty, all mixing together. No masters. Crane continued. No overseers. He looked at the gathered faces, and no chains. Not as ever again. Heads nodded. Tears fell. Hands lifted in agreement. For the first time. Dustwater Bend wasn't just a town. It was a possibility. While the people gathered around Crane, Clara stood a short distance away, alone. Just beneath the hanging tree, the rope lay coiled at its base like a dead snake, and the crate she'd stood on was now splintered in the dirt. She stared at the spot where her life had nearly ended. Not with fear, not with anger, just breath. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a full one, slow and deep, filling her chest until it almost hurt. Freedom had a strange weight, she realized, heavy in places she'd forgotten she carried. Mal approached quietly, wincing with every step. His ribs were bruised purple, and his side still bled through the fresh bandage Crane had wrapped him in. But he looked steadier now, the kind of steady a man finds after dragging himself through hell and discovering he's still capable of standing tall. Clara didn't turn when she heard him approach. She didn't need to. "You holding up?" Mal asked, voice low, roughened by smoke and pain. She let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I'm standing. That's more than I expected today." Mal nodded, looking at the town rebuilding piece by piece around them. "It's over." Clara shook her head, not in denial, but in understanding. "No, not over. Just different." She paused, then added softly, "And different is enough for now." Mal watched her for a long moment, this woman who had survived fire, rope, betrayal, and loss, and still found the strength to look forward instead of back. "What now?" he finally asked. Clara looked north. toward the empty horizon where the desert stretched endless and open. The sun was rising behind them, casting long shadows ahead, as if the day itself wanted to push them toward something new. I think, she began, choosing her words carefully. I'd like to see a world with no more places like Dustwater Bend. Mal nodded. That's a long road. Good, she said. I'm tired of short ones. He almost smiled at that. Behind them, Bishop Crane called out instructions to townsfolk, forming small work crews. Families gathered broken boards. Kids carried buckets of water to douse the last embers. Dustwater was learning how to breathe again. Clara stepped away from the hanging tree, leaving the shadow of it behind. Mal walked beside her, both of them moving slower than they wanted, but stronger than they expected. They saddled two horses, animals so dusty and worn they looked like part of the landscape, and rode toward the North Road. No one stopped them. No one asked where they were going. People simply nodded with gratitude, with quiet respect, with the unspoken truth that some heroes weren't meant to stay in one place. At the edge of town, Clara looked back one last time, not to mourn, not to regret, just to remember. Then she turned forward. Mal clicked his tongue. The horses moved, and the two of them rode out of Dustwater Bend as the sunlight stretched behind them, like a gold trail leading the way. Two survivors, two warriors, no longer running, now choosing where to go. A story of justice earned and justice shared. If this story struck a chord with you, let me know down in the comments. Tell me which part hit hardest and what frontier you want me to ride into next. And if you want more tales of Jaw's justice, courage, and the unbuilt corners of the American West, hit like, share, and subscribe to the Black Frontier. Your support helps these stories live on. I'll see you on the next trail.